In order to be successful in life, you have to be okay with being uncomfortable on some level in order to push forward and achieve. You have to elevate yourself above being nervous, for example, in front of a big crowd. Wow, feels kind of uncomfortable. Mountains themselves, being up on summits, really isn't that bad. The views are great, outstanding. But in order to be successful in life, you have to accept and embrace being uncomfortable on some level in order to push forward and achieve. Have you ever been in the middle of a tough climb in your life, unroped and scared that you could fall? Yeah, you've all been there. Has your tough climb ever felt like maybe being up on Mount Everest, maybe being like you're climbing Mount Everest? Yeah, I understand. It just so happens that about a year ago at this time, I had my own Everest to climb. Now, you've all set goals for yourself, personal, professional, family-oriented, and perhaps those were all your own Everests. Well, tonight, I'm going to take you through my journey up my own Everest. And it just so happened that it was the real thing about a year ago. But first, my journey towards Everest began at an early age. Red Sandstone Elementary School in Vail, Colorado. I was surrounded by the likes of athletes, skier athletes actually, Toby Dawson, Sarah Schlepper, Christel Bosco, all Olympians. They were all skiers that had aspired to become Olympians. So talk about being intimidated. In second grade, sitting in a classroom, you may be able to pick me out here, but I was in this class with these folks that were skiers, and I felt at the time, yeah, I could be a skier, but I felt like I was bound for something different, something greater than that. And I grew up on a golf course in Eagle Vale, Colorado. And now I know what you're thinking, maybe I had aspirations of becoming the next Tiger Woods. Well, me and my friends did spend a lot of time on the golf course, and it wasn't practicing golf. It was actually running around in the woods, causing mischief, shooting bottle rockets at golfers, water balloon launchers, making water balloon launchers, shooting those at passing golf carts, and then running into the woods and hiding in a network of forts and thickets in the steep terrain and dense woods. And the cops were always on our heels, but they could never catch us. We were always able to get away. And until one day, we were being pretty smart, so we thought, shooting water balloons at cars, and we hit a house. And the cops were waiting for us in my backyard as we jumped onto our porch, and they hauled us off to the cop precinct, called our parents, and our parents decided to teach us a lesson. I was with two of my friends, and they basically said, hey, just keep our sons at the cop precinct tonight, and we'll teach them a lesson. We'll pick them up in the morning. So they made us stay the night there, and I tell you what, the TV dinners were terrible. And the next morning, our parents picked us up and took us home, and my mom said, why can't you just be like normal kids and just go off into the woods, camp, and maybe climb Elk Mountain, which is a 9,000-foot peak just outside of my neighborhood, and maybe you could hike it, in a day. And so I said, okay, we'll go out there, we'll hike and we'll camp for 2 nights, we'll stay away from the golf course. And so that's what we did. We headed out into the golf course, but off into the woods, and in an hour we had hiked. I was a 10 or 11-year-old kid myself, and Chris and Brian. Chris is now a Navy SEAL, and Brian is a ski patrolman. And we hiked up on this mountain in the first hour, and they said, all right, great, well, let's go back to the golf course and cause trouble. And I said, no. We're going to head up, and we're going to climb this other mountain above Beaver Creek Mountain called Grouse Peak. And Grouse Peak was a 13,000-foot mountain, and you can imagine us 10 or 11-year-old kids hiking all the way up there, backed up to the Holy Cross Wilderness. And as I stood on the summit of that peak, I could see all the other mountains in Colorado. And I could just see the gorgeous views. And at that moment, I had seen that there are other peaks called 14ers, 14,000-foot peaks. And as a 10 or 11-year-old kid, I said to myself, well, what's the highest mountain in the world? Well, I'd found out it was Mount Everest. And my birthday's in May every year. And standing on that summit as a 10 or 11-year-old kid, I said to myself, well, someday I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And during May, there's always something in the news about Everest. It's the height of the Everest climbing season. And so at that moment, I knew I was always an Everest kid and that I had aspired to climb Everest someday. Well, during that time, I saw all the other 14ers. And when I got my driver's license and my learner's permit as a 15-year-old kid, I headed out and I had climbed all of the 14,000-foot mountains by the time I turned 18. And so as I headed out, I would come back at the end of a summer and get ready for football two-a-days. And I returned running gassers and sprints during football and beating everybody by 50 yards. And the coaches were like, well, what got into this kid? And it's like, well, I was climbing mountains all summer. So I'd been training really hard, and I was in incredible shape because of that. Well, as time passed, the accolades that I earned through academics and athletics proved to be a vehicle towards my path to climbing big mountains. Not only was I a four-sport athlete in high school, I went on to play college basketball at the Division I level, and I went on after that to climb big mountains on other continents. In fact, 4 of the 7 continental summits, but also other peaks in places like Asia and South America. And those experiences basically were my formula to success, meaning that I set goals high, really high for myself. I didn't listen to what other people said, could or couldn't be done. And that's been kind of my formula to success. And by choosing to set my goals high, I developed what I call a positive attitude, or otherwise known as a positude. And a positude will get you really far in life. It'll get you a long way in life. And in fact, everybody told me I couldn't become a Division I basketball player, and I said no. And I believed every day, working really hard with what I call the no off days philosophy. And that is that you can't take days off if you want to be successful in life and move forward towards your goals. And I was part of 4 Mid-Continent Conference basketball championships, played in 3 NCAA Division I men's basketball tournaments. And I continued to use that positude to fuel my thirst for mountains as a training tool. Because again, I would train all summer hiking mountains here in Colorado, and I'd get back to my season in the fall and would just be in really good shape. And as I moved through after college in the early 2000s, one time I went up on Mount Elbert, the highest mountain in Colorado, with a friend of mine, Eric, who fought in Desert Storm. And he thought it'd be a good idea to go up and spend the night on the summit one night. And at the time I was kind of like, huh? That's a little bit crazy. And so we hiked up that evening and spent the night, and the stars were out, and it was a beautiful sunset and a gorgeous sunrise in the morning. And then in the year 2005, I kind of began my international climbing career. And I spent the night on some of the highest peaks in Colorado as a training tool to acclimate my body for the rigors of high altitude in other parts of the world, because the mountains get even higher in those places. And this is where the idea kind of came about, to sleep on every summit. And I was talking to one of my friends, Chris, and told him, hey, I think it's possible that you could fit a tent on all 58 mountains in Colorado and sleep up there. And he was kind of like, man, you're crazy. Why would you even want to consider doing that? Are you stupid? And I said, well, I think it'd just be something that no one's ever done before. And so he said, well, you could probably do that, but you'd have to there's like 58 mountains, so you'd have to be out of a job or something. And I said, okay, well, maybe that could be a possibility. So what happened was, I was laid off from my job at Central Washington University as a professor. So I called him up on the phone in June. I said, hey, guess what? I've got an indefinite amount of time now, and I don't have a job. And he said, oh, good. He's like, all right, well, I'll watch the weather forecast for you, because I can't go with you all the time. And so in the year 2011, in the summer, I started my journey on all the summits. And like I said, at the time, he thought it was a very difficult and crazy feat to achieve. I'd be climbing in afternoon thunderstorms, facing all kinds of adversity. And it would be kind of a situation where I'd have to really watch the weather and try to make smart decisions and climb really fast. But the way I saw it was, my back was against the wall. In order to be successful in life, again, not only do you have to deal with being uncomfortable, but you have to face failure, look it in the eye, and basically turn and go the other way. For me, failure wasn't an option. Sometimes in life you have to do something outrageous to get noticed, something that sets yourself apart from the rest of the pack, because let's face it, it's a competitive world out there. So I set out for 95 days on the 6 major mountain ranges in Colorado, where the 14,000-foot mountains are. And most of you here in the audience reside here in Colorado, so you probably know what these mountains are, 14,000 feet. You can see some of them probably right outside the theater today. But the term bivouac, a long night of suffering. Now, why do we as humans subject ourselves to suffering? We've all been there. Sometimes you might be in the middle of something that's just a very difficult task, and you wonder to yourself, why am I doing this? But you should also remember that suffering is short-lived, and that you will often become a stronger and better person as a result of temporary suffering by pushing yourself through things. And I can assure you by the smile on my face in this particular example that I was actually pretty happy in my sleeping bag, enjoying a beautiful sunset and the views and the solitude that came along with it. And my journey definitely pushed me through, like I said, a 95-day period. I had to climb 73 peaks in 95 days because on 20 separate occasions, I was turned around. I failed. But every time I failed, I learned something from it, and I went back again, and I tried it again. And there were just some beautiful perches, some places that I stayed the evenings. And remember that when you're going through some of your experiences that you should actually stop and enjoy the journey every once in a while, take in the views. And fortunately, I was also joined by a great friend of mine who motivated me. And we've all had times in our lives where we've confided in somebody or we've had somebody motivate us or help us through a difficult time. And this was no different with a good friend of mine who on numerous occasions would show up and would bring me Qdoba, for example, or would bring me a smile on his face where 3, 4, 5, 6 nights in a row I had been spending the night on summits all by myself. And this guy shows up fresh with a burrito and says, hey man, you can push yourself again through the next one, because he saw what the greater goal was, and that was that I had aspired to climb Mount Everest someday, and that if my body was prepared for the rigors of that by this temporary suffering, that I would be able to move forward and become a better climber. And so I spent beautiful nights on summits like the Maroon Bells, El Diente, Mount Eolus. And I had some trying times as well during this period. One evening I'd been defeated from a summit, chased off by a storm, and I returned to my vehicle only to find paw prints on the hood. And I had opened up the vehicle and I thought somebody stole my wallet, but then I looked and the inside of the truck was ransacked. There were bite marks in my cooler. There were a trail of gummy bears leading into the woods. Summer sausage was strewn all over the interior. And worst of all, when I tried to make a recovery shake from my whey protein, the whey protein was nowhere to be found. So you can imagine a little bear hopped up on whey protein in the woods. And worst of all, I had to climb back up that mountain to try to make it for a sunset, and I didn't want to go back up there knowing that there was a bear in the woods. And so, finally I made it up to the summit. I went back up there, and third time was the charm on Little Bear. Did not see the bear, but what I did see was a beautiful summit. And third time was also a charm on a beautiful peak called Capitol Peak. And this whole project taught me to strive for things that had never been done before. Nobody had ever slept on the summits of all the peaks, but for you, you may have accomplished something first in your own lives. Like I said, personal, professional, any sort of goal. And that can be every bit as sweet. Even if somebody else has done something similar to what you've done before, if it's a first for you, then that's what matters. And it's not about the mountain. It's not about the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. Have an inner belief in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself from the beginning, then you're stuck dead right in your tracks right there. And you might as well not even begin your task. And so I faced Mount Everest, a mountain through all the trials and tribulations that I'd wanted to climb since I was 10 or 11 years old. And when I was 10 or 11 years old, I knew that I wanted to climb that mountain. And about a year ago, I headed over there. And sometimes when you see that great goal that you've had laid out before you, especially a big mountain like this, you look at it and you say, wow, I'm really going to stand on top of that thing? And really, it's all about accountability in yourself. First, ask yourself what you want, and then you have to do it. But the important part is to enjoy the journey along the way. Set short-term goals, like getting to Disneyland. Base camp. And once you've arrived at that base camp at 17,000 feet, the amount of oxygen is only about half of there is at sea level. It's very hard to breathe. But you've put yourself in the position through hard work, a week to 10 days' time, getting to base camp, preparing yourself, letting your body adjust to the lack of oxygen, climbing up and down the mountain. There are lots of daunting feelings that come with the notorious Khumbu icefall. You've got giant seracs, rickety bridges, crevasses that you can't see the bottom of. You're going to have times in your life that you feel that same way. But it's important to just focus on the greater goal and move forward across those rickety bridges. You're going to have moments in your life where you cannot see the bottom, but you have to have faith to believe that everything is going to be all right and that you're going to make it. But standing atop your summit, your Everest, is easier said than done. And after 6 weeks of patience, it was finally time to head to the summit. There are no shortcuts towards any place worth going. And as we climbed towards the summit was getting so much closer. All that hard work, all that patience, all that training, was it going to pay off? Some of these views from the highest camp in the world, the next time you're in an airplane, look out the window. That's how high this mountain is. The winds pick up. We waited a day after everybody else went up, and we allowed the climbers to go up. But as the winds picked up, I was nervous. Would we get our chance to go to the summit? Was our weather window closing? People were still coming down from the day before, and the winds picked up. They had been caught in traffic jams. And there were so many people from the day before that as people were coming down, I had to stop on the way up, blown off my feet in 100 miles per hour winds. And basically, the highest dot in the photo, I had to turn around. And as I was coming down, we helped drag 3 people back to the high camp to save them. And I gave my oxygen away for 4 hours. And it was urgent. The situation was very urgent. People had perished while we were up there. And I had to retreat all the way back down to base camp, not knowing what the future held. And that was the question. Could I go back up? Was I strong enough to go back up? There were a lot of climbers on our team that basically gave up and went home. And I was told by friends and family, my friends Chris and Bob and my parents, they said, hey, I think you're strong enough to go back up. Look at what you did with that Bivvies project. And what convinced me was that this Sherpa Jangbu came to me and said, hey, I've been turned around from an Everest summit 11 times. Or I've gone to the summit of Everest 11 times, and I've never been turned away from a summit. Will you go back up with me? And I said, yeah, absolutely, I will. I'll go back up with you. And it was an easy decision, of course. It'd be like if LeBron James asked you to play horse. Would you turn him down? Would you say no? And so what I did was I headed back up, and we were able to make it back all the way back to the summit and enjoyed some of the incredible views as the sun rose. And as I stood on that summit only for a very short time, for an hour, I realized that achieving your goals is never going to be easy. That if doing something great was easy, then everybody could do it and there would be no reward for doing it. And so I realized that it was more about the journey. It was more about the preparation and the friendships that I made along the way. So take that thought with you as you go, and remember to always stop and enjoy the views along the way. And remember that in order to be successful in life, you have to accept and embrace being uncomfortable on some level in order to push forward and achieve. So go out there and find your Everests, climb new Everests, and thank you.